Yo bar, what's up and what's happening? And welcome back to It's the Yo Bar series with me, Chris Harding. So, an age-old question that I get asked all the time by clients online and both clients that I train physically is it either energy in versus energy out, meaning do more exercise, or is it calories in versus calories out, meaning eat less calories? So, in order to answer that question, I've got a question for you. Rather than it being about energy in versus energy out or calories in versus calories out, have you ever considered that it may be a hormonal imbalance as to the reason why you're struggling to either lose weight, control a metabolic problems such as type 2 diabetes, possibly even your cholesterol, or just want to live a better life and have more information around how to eat better? So for me to be able to give you an answer, I want to put this into context for you so that it makes sense to you. So firstly, back in 2010, the First Lady of America, Michelle Obama, launched a campaign which is called Let's Move. And Let's Move was based around getting children back into activity. So that's the energy in versus energy out concept. And it also tried to encourage parents to encourage their children to do more exercise inside school and out of school. In 2008, over here in the UK government created a campaign called Healthy Weight, Healthy Lives. And on the back of that, there was another campaign which was basically aimed at children again, which was called Change for Life. And again, that campaign was to try and get children to be more active, but also more aware of what types of foods that they choose to eat. So what these two campaigns have got in common is that unfortunately, they both have completely failed. And there's evidence of that. In 2010, when Michelle Obama started her campaign through the US government, it was roughly about 35 to 37% obesity. So people who are classed as obese, between 35 and 37%. If you look at the USA Today, from statistics from 2020 to 2022, you're looking at 45%. So you're basically talking about a 10% increase. And it's the same here in the UK, that although we keep trying to push more activity and less calories, it's not actually working. So you might be saying to yourself, well, why is this? Well, I think the reason this is because we're focusing on the wrong solution. We think that calories in versus calories out, or doing more exercise, meaning energy in versus energy out, is actually the answer, but it's not. You're focusing on the wrong solution because it's not the solution. In fact, the solution of calories and energy is actually making the problem probably worse, because you're chasing, a magic dragon that doesn't actually exist. However, the real problem, what you should be focusing on, is your hormones. And I'll give you an example. So your body uses hormones to regulate everything in your day-to-day life. For example, if you get too hot, you will sweat. If you get too cold, you'll start to shiver to keep you warm. There are hormones to tell you that you're hungry. There are hormones to tell you that you're too full. There are hormones to tell you that when you need to sleep, and there are also hormones to tell you when you need to wake up. So your body uses hormones as ways of signaling something to happen. So, I need to eat, therefore there's a hormone that is secreted that makes you feel hungry. So when it comes to hormones such as putting on too much weight, well, there is a hormone that helps you put on weight, and that hormone is called insulin. And insulin is being spiked, in my opinion, and from the clients that I've been working with, because I work with type 2 diabetics, insulin's being spiked too frequently because the individual is consuming too much highly refined sugar, too much highly refined grains, and those products also tend to have quite a lot of fat in them. So there's a lot of calories within those products because they tend to use fat as something to add in flavor and also texture. So insulin is being spiked too many times. Well, how is this? Well, every single time that you eat, it spikes insulin. And depending on the type of food that you choose to consume, it's actually going to spike insulin in the wrong way. I always call this the copper and the robber. So the copper's the good guy and the robber's the bad guy. If you think of sugar or a refined grain, what you're basically talking about is when you consume that or ingest it, it shoots your blood glucose up very quickly. So insulin will actually chase that. So the robber is sugar, and that's going up. It's giving you a sugar high. And actually what happens very quickly afterwards is the body releases insulin, which is the copper, catches the robber, and then brings it back down and actually brings it below baseline, which basically means that you have what we call a sugar crash. Now, when you're consuming highly processed foods, that then means that you feel hungry again. So another hormone is released to make you feel hungry because you've had that sugar crash. So you've had a refined food, such as, a snack or chocolate bar, let's say, something of that nature. It's actually going to make you feel more hungry in 15 to 20 minutes time because your body's actually dealt with it by using insulin. But unfortunately, the way that insulin works is that it's there to store energy into the muscles, and it's also there to drive nutrients into the right places. However, because we're spiking it so frequently, what's starting to happen is that it continues just to store energy as much as it can until it can't do it anymore. And so what happens is there's a backup, okay? And that function happens via the liver. So too much refined grain and too much sugar and consuming products which have got way too many calories in is basically going to mean that your insulin is spiking over and over again. And what happens is that eventually the body becomes resistant to that. So when it's spiked too frequently, too many times, you get something which is called insulin resistance or hyperinsulinemia. And because of that, what's also happening is that's starting to have other effects on other hormones. So too many spikes of insulin correlates to obesity or putting on too much weight, because that's what insulin's there to do, is there to store energy. But if we're spiking it too many times throughout the day, the body has got no other choice or no other option other than to continue to store it. And that storage is obviously fat. However, if you think about it, is it that our hormones are just going rogue because they're out of control? Or is it that they're actually trying to control a problem that we are creating? Well, the answer to that is that it's actually the second answer. We are creating the problem by consuming too frequently too much refined food. So what I want to do for you is I want to break down some of the key hormones and actually what they do, and just give you a very brief description. Insulin quite basically stores energy. It stores it either in the muscle tissue or it stores it in either what we call the subcutaneous fat, which is a fat around the abdomen, around the thighs and the places that we don't like to see it inside the mirror. The reason why it does that is because it's in charge of energy storage, okay? And it also is in charge of energy distribution throughout the body. But that's slightly separate from what I'm trying to get to. What you want to know about insulin is that it stores energy. And if it has too much energy, it stores it as fat. So you can always think of your fat, your body fat, as extra calories or extra energy that can be used at a later date. And that's pretty much what the hormone's there for, is saving it for a later time. So there's too many spikes of insulin, then that means that the liver has got no other option other than to start to store more fat around the subcutaneous tissue, which is subcutaneous fat, belly fat, and also the organs as well. So that's what we call visceral fat. So another hormone that's found alongside insulin is a hormone that's called cortisol. Cortisol is widely known as the stress hormone. And when we get stressed, it actually spikes our insulin, and that actually therefore makes us store weight more. So if you're an individual who is struggling or has got too much stress, especially a stressful job or a stressful life, then it's more likely that you're actually going to store fat, especially with regards to the types of foods that you choose to eat. So insulin and cortisol, you do often find them together, especially when cortisol is spiked when the individual is highly stressed. So very basically, to be able to control your cortisol levels, you just need to be able to control your stress levels. And sometimes I find that my clients can actually help that because they've got, they've got responsibility in their jobs, or they've got quite high powered jobs. So what I would probably recommend is that finding an outlet, finding something to do. For me personally, is going to the gym. I love training, but it could be something outdoors. It could be something such as long walks. It could be listening to music. It could be meditating. It could just be reading, or doing something in your home, or doing something with your family. But if you do more to control your stress, then you're going to control your cortisol. That in turn is going to control your insulin spikes, and that in turn is gonna give you a greater chance of not storing body fat. Okay, so we've got over the first two, which is insulin and cortisol. They're quite well known, but the third one I'm going to talk about is a hormone called leptin. Now, leptin is basically fat signaling. So it tells the body how much fat it has, and it signals when it is signaled when it needs to store fat, and it also sends a signal to the brain when it can release fat, which basically means that the body's using fat as energy. What you might like to know about leptin is that if it's spiked too many times, again, the body becomes resistant to it. So with insulin, you get insulin resistance, which is called hyperinsulinemia. And with leptin, you get the same thing, which is called hyperleptinemia. And it's where resistance is building up and the body isn't sensitive to those hormones anymore. Now, if you're someone who is obese, who does suffer with obesity, or you've got a metabolic problem such as type 2 diabetes, or you just feel that you're putting on too much weight, it's harder for you to move around, and you get breathless very quickly, and possibly your cardiovascular isn't where it should be, so you're not as fit as you'd like to be, or you're not as healthy as you'd like to be. Having hormone resistance, especially when it comes to the hormones that are there to control weight, isn't a good thing. And I'll come on to the answer for you a little bit later on. So another two very well-known hormones is dopamine and serotonin. And you might be saying, well, what's dopamine and serotonin got to do with the fact that, I want to deal with my weight issue, or I want to deal with my type 2 diabetes, or I want to deal with my atherosclerosis, which is basically looking at sort of cholesterol, heart attacks, strokes, cardiovascular problems of the metabolism. What's dopamine and serotonin got to do with that? Well, dopamine and serotonin are hormones of the brain. So the way I think about it is that dopamine is the one for reward, and serotonin is the one for strive or drive. So I want something, therefore I want to obtain it. And once I've obtained it, I then get a reward for that. Now, it works for anything. And the reason is because in our history as humans, when we would have possibly been hunter-gatherers, we would have wanted to have gone and hunted. Therefore, that needs serotonin to get up and go and do that, to give us the drive to want to do that. When we catch the hunt, that's our reward, and that's where dopamine comes from. So all our hormones that we have in our body are things that have evolved with us over many hundreds of thousands of years, and they're what I call ancient hormones. The reason I call them ancient hormones is because they've been there for a long time and they are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. However, in the 21st century, in the lifestyle that we're living today, especially with highly stressful environments, and also highly processed and highly refined food, our hormones just aren't working, and that's what's giving us an imbalance. The hormone imbalance is coming from our lifestyles, and in my opinion, it's coming from the food that we're eating and the highly refined food and highly processed food. Dopamine's reward. Serotonin is drive. Now, what happens if you consume, let's just say, nice and simple, a chocolate bar? What happens if you consume a chocolate bar? Well, it gives you a reward because it tastes good. It melts in the mouth. It is something that you could easily have again. And so it gives you a hit of dopamine. Now, let's imagine that you walked to the shop, you bought a chocolate bar, ate the chocolate bar, and you're like, I could have another one. Okay, go back and have a second chocolate bar. Go back and have a third chocolate bar. I promise you that the second chocolate bar and the third chocolate bar won't taste as good as the first one. It won't feel as good. Why? Because the body's starting to become already resistant to its own dopamine. The hit isn't as high. And there's a reason for that. Because when you get a dopamine spike, a lot like you do with insulin, the body drives it back down. So it pulls the dopamine back down below baseline level. And because you've now got a baseline level or beneath baseline level dopamine, when you try to get a high again, it ramps it up, but it doesn't ramp it up as high because it's already in a deficit. And that's the problem. We are basically like a roller coaster. To put it in really simple terms for you, our hormones are being triggered so frequently, so often, especially with things like social media. Like social media is another big one where it's causing quite a lot of stress for younger people, actually making them sort of idolize people who are online, even though they aren't really living their real lives, they're living their lives online. But also at the same time, social media gives us a huge amount of dopamine, and what I call very cheap dopamine. It's kind of a cheap dopamine hit. You can think about that within the processed food that you may choose to consume, or that you may know someone who does consume that type of food. Basically, the hormone is being imbalanced, and therefore it's causing this kind of wave or ripple effect where the body's trying to control it and get back to equilibrium, whereas the types of foods that you choose to eat interrupting your dopamine and also your serotonin hormones. So the next couple of hormones that I want to talk about are the incretin hormones. Now, the incretin hormones have had a little bit of press recently because there have been some drugs that have been recently released that are there to control weight and also provoke weight loss with individuals, but I won't get into that. The incretin hormones are basically made of GLP-1 and GIP. And I'm going to have to read out those for you because I always get a little bit lost. So this is always a little bit of a mouthful for me. So GIP is glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, and GLP-1 is glucagon-like peptide 1. Now let me give you a little bit more of a breakdown of those. So those two hormones are basically there to help us lose weight or control weight. So they're the hormones that control weight. So remember, you've got cortisol, you've got leptin, and the most important one you've got is insulin. Well, they're the ones that tend to manage weight and energy in, and the GIP and the GLP-1 are the hormones that tend to control you feeling satisfied. So the way that they do that is actually slow down things like your stomach from emptying so quickly. So when you've got a belly full of food, obviously that process has to start by going into the colon. However, it's a slower transit. GLP-1 and GIP are basically hormones that are there to stop you from feeling hungry. They're there to say, actually, we've got enough energy in here. And therefore, when you look at the GIP and the GLP-1, and then you look at cortisol, leptin, and insulin, you can see how those hormones start to try to make a balance. They're doing their job. But because one is being stored so quickly, or one's being used so quickly, which are the ones like insulin, cortisol, and leptin, your body's becoming resistant to them. And actually what we need to do is we need to try and increase these ones, but naturally, I feel. So the GLP-1 and the GIP need to be increased naturally. I'm going to give you one more hormone to go away with, and then we'll discuss an answer for you. So the final hormone is glucagon, and glucagon is created in the pancreas along with insulin. And glucagon's job is pretty much the opposite to what insulin's job is. So insulin is spiked and is sensitive to sugar. However, when sugar levels get too low in the body, glucagon is then spiked, which then sends a signal to say, hey, there's no energy here, I need energy. Now, what the body will do if it's still not fed is it will start to try and use other stores of energy, such as the glycogen in the muscle tissue, which is converted back into glucose or released as glucose, and that uses energy, so that brings sugar levels back up. So it's glucagon's responsibility to bring sugar levels back to normal status. However, when an individual is consuming too much refined food, too much sugary food, too many snacks, too frequently, too often, basically glucagon again is spiked too many times because it's trying to control the level of blood sugar. Okay, so its purpose is trying to control the same as insulin is. But again, if it's being spiked too many times too frequently, you're starting to see this sugar crash come back again. So this is the roller coaster effect. The roller coaster effect is that you're having too much refined sugar or too much refined processed, ultra processed food that's going into the system, and the body's using hormones to try and regulate that. However, the regulation is becoming imbalanced because you're having too much of it. So it comes up too high and then it crashes it down. You try to bring it back up again, it crashes it back down. And so your hormone levels become imbalanced. And that is the main reason, in fact, it's the only reason, in my opinion, as to why individuals put on weight. So it's not energy in versus energy out. It's not calories in versus calories out, because your body basically always tries to keep equilibrium as best it can. It tries to keep a status. But if you keep messing around with that status by consuming those types of foods, then yes, of course, you are going to put on weight. It's just inevitable, because your body's got no other choice other than to use the hormones it's got to try and control and regulate the body as is. Therefore, what does that mean? So if you look at someone who is overweight and you say, all right then, so it's not energy in versus energy out, therefore the exercise that I do doesn't count. Well, yes, it does count, because it basically means that it's there for your health, your fitness, your well-being, your mental well-being, and also managing things such as stress. So obviously, exercise is very important. And then you sort of say, well, calories in versus calories out, is that the answer? No, it's not, because if you have too fewer calories, your body will find a way to reserve energy. So if you have, let's just say you have 1,000 calories a day, your body will reserve energy, and it will do that by lowering things down, lowering down your immune system, even lowering down things like your blood pressure. A lot of people who don't have enough calories often feel quite cold. Well, it's because the body is lowering things down, and that's to try to control the amount of energy expenditure, okay, within the body. Therefore, why can't a person who's overweight or obese lose weight then? Why can't they do that? Well, because their body has become resistant to the hormones that their body has. So therefore, the types of food that they're choosing to eat, and the frequency of how many times they're eating them, and the volume of calories or energy inside that food is what's actually making them obese. So how do you get around that? How are you going to get around that problem? Because whatever they do, too much exercise or not enough exercise, or too many calories or not enough calories, it's not actually going to lose them weight. And we can tell that because it's failed. Every single diet that's been done before has pretty much failed. There is no strict rule on dieting that's actually worked for anyone, because every single person, each individual person, has got their own needs. They've got their own tastes, their own requirements, their own likes and dislikes for food, and all of that is very important. But let me answer the question for you. You've got someone who's overweight. Okay, we've discussed about the hormones, and let's just say that we all agree that it's a hormonal problem. How do you control that? Well, you start to take control of what you're consuming, and you start to take control of how you regulate it. So let me give you some tips, or let me give you some answers to this problem. First of all, let's look at the food. So, okay, I've banged on about refined sugars and refined grains and, too much dietary fat within those products. You get it. Protein. Protein is a macronutrient that actually slows down the rate of insulin. So insulin doesn't spike as high when dietary protein or whole food protein is present within the system or within the gut. As the stomach has started to digest things, it will naturally release insulin to help the macronutrients be driven to the right place. That's sort of insulin's job. And protein is a great buffer of that. So basically, insulin still spiked, but it's spiked at a much slower rate, and it doesn't go as high, which means it's not trying to crash it back down either. The body isn't trying to crash the insulin back down. So the control of your insulin hormone can be dealt with by consuming whole foods that have got decent amounts of protein in them. And that then brings me on to the next one, which is fat. So dietary fat, either saturated or unsaturated, have got benefits to slowing down and lowering the spike of insulin. Okay, so again, it acts as a buffer. So protein and fats, they both are macronutrients that act as buffers inside the gut. And as the gut starting to break that food down, insulin doesn't go up as high. Therefore, it doesn't need to be crashed back down. So the individual who's consuming that food doesn't get an energy spike and an energy crash. referring back to that roller coaster that we were with the refined foods and the refined sugars. The third one is fiber. Okay, so fiber is basic. Well, there's soluble and non-soluble fiber, but I won't go into that today. Fiber is basically roughage, and we all know that. Fiber mainly consumed in vegetables. You can consume some fruits, but obviously fruit have got fructose in, and unfortunately we don't have the enzyme to break down fructose, so it gets stored as fat. That's a different video for another time. However, so try to control your fruit intake, but try to uptake more of your vegetables. The more fiber you have, the more chance that it becomes almost impossible for insulin to spike at all, because fiber isn't digestible. Fiber can't be used as energy. The macros are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and fiber, dietary fiber, isn't a source of energy. It's basically a source of roughage, and that works really well when you look at trying to control your spike of the hormone insulin. So the fourth answer isn't actually to do with macronutrients or food or what you consume. It's actually to do with how you choose to consume food, or when you choose to consume food, I probably should say. So when you choose to consume food, let's again take a normal person who has a relatively average diet of some processed, some highly processed, some whole. When you look at individuals who just have a normal diet, they'll probably eat 3 times a day. Most people consume breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Whatever you tend to do, if you think about it, how many times do you consume something during a day? And that also includes liquids as well, especially if those liquids have got things like sugars in them or artificial sweeteners. What you're doing is you're spiking your insulin every single time. So therefore, the answer is when you decide to eat, and that goes on to intermittent fasting. So I don't want to go into intermittent fasting. I just want to give you a very basic principle. So in my opinion, and how I work with clients is, yes, you can look at time. You can look at starting at midday and going all the way through until 7 p.m. and having a 7-hour window there to consume food or consume the food that you want to. However, just to start yourself off, if you're actually considering after this video, I might actually try and do that, then what I would try to do is I just consume 2 very decent sized meals per day. And those meals need to have dietary fat, they need to have dietary protein, some carbohydrates, but hopefully the carbohydrates are coming from more whole food and not refined food. Okay, so not coming from like a refined cereal or a refined grain or sugar. So that's where your carbohydrate should be coming from. And also some fiber as well. Now, because you're only going to eat twice in that day, you do need to eat a decent amount, okay? Don't worry about overconsumption, because your body will try and baseline that out anyway for equilibrium, okay? That's what the hormones are there for. But by eating twice a day, the real gem in this is that you're only spiking insulin twice in that day, okay? So imagine that you do eat at 12 and you do eat at 7. You eat 2 pretty decent sized meals. Always remember to drink plenty of fluid throughout the day as well, because that gives you the feeling of fullness and satiety. And by doing that, you're actually starting to control your hormones again, because of the times in which you choose to eat and the types of food that you choose to eat. You're actually starting to better your hormone imbalance, and the body over time, you have to give it time and you have to stick to this. Over time, your body starts to be able to regulate properly again, and then you'll start to see that either you or the individual who chooses to do this actually starts to lose weight and their health starts to improve because they are losing weight. They'll also feel a lot better as well. They won't feel as tired, they won't feel as irritated, they won't feel as stressed. They'll be able to cope with things a lot better. Their overall well-being will be a lot better. All based around the fact that they're eating whole food and they're eating it at chosen specific times. And as I say, I often advise people to do 2 big meals a day to start off with. And if you want to look into intermittent fasting, what I'll do is I'll link a video here for you. And just quickly, guys, on the back of that, if you are someone who suffers with type 2 diabetes, or you've been diagnosed as pre-diabetic, perhaps you've even been told that you're going to have to go onto medication, or the frightening fact that your medication is actually going to have to go up because your diabetes is becoming more out of control, then please drop a comment in the comment section below and I will get back to you. Or you can go to my website, which is www.adaptionnutrition.com. So I hope you found that video insightful, and I'm sorry it's a long one, but I feel that it is something that gives you a really good idea as to what's going on. In my opinion, a lot of weight issues are related or correlated to the imbalancing of hormones. Yes, of course, exercise is important, and the monitoring and controlling of your calorie intake is also very important. But more importantly than those two, I feel, for those of you who want to address your situation, is that you need to address the type of food that you're consuming and how frequently you're consuming it. Okay, guys, thank you for watching. Please remember to drop a comment in the comment section below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It does definitely help the algorithm, and it also helps me, almost at 500 subscribers, which is pretty exciting. And yeah, be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bye.
It's the Yo Bossy